The Spain squad's announced this week, and the big story, certainly the Catalan newspapers have thoroughly enjoyed. 8 representatives from Barcelona, 0 for Madrid, as we welcome in Sid Lowe to the show. Sid, this has never happened before, is it? Never has there been a Spain squad going to a World Cup without any Real Madrid players.
Yeah, that's right. It's the first time that this has happened in history. It's true, obviously, that over the last 10 years or so, there's been a progression towards more and more Barcelona players and ever fewer Real Madrid players, because, of course, that's a product of the nature of the market, the nature of the kind of players that Real Madrid pursue, the fact that Barcelona are producing more players through the youth system and make it to the first team than Real Madrid are. And so, essentially, Barcelona have had far more good quality Spanish players to choose from. And this time round, in truth, while this has caused quite a lot of noise, I think this is an entirely natural choice. I don't think there's a single player that you look at and you look at this squad and you think, well, he should have been in. I think this is largely, I think, an almost entirely uncontroversial squad.
It's a good squad, isn't it, boys?
You don't want to play them.
I know Spanish is not your strength, Dan, but sí.
Fuerte.
Muy fuerte.
Muy fuerte, Sid.
It's quite fuerte. I mean, look, there's a few doubts there, I think. And obviously those doubts really focus on the 2 players that made them so different at the European Championships, the 2 wingers, Nicol and Lamine Yamal. Lamine Yamal has got an injury and we don't expect him to play, at least we don't expect him to start until possibly the 3rd game at the earliest. We think he might get minutes in the first couple of games. We've seen obviously that Nicol has struggled with injuries all season, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen Victor Muñoz get given an opportunity. And so I think there's a couple of doubts in those positions. Obviously they've had doubts as well at central defence, which is why Robin Lenormand, for example, who was a starter at the European Championships, isn't in because he's not had a particularly great season. But yeah, I think you're right. You look at this squad and you say that it's got balance, it's got stability, because there's not a huge amount of change from before, but I think there's a relatively significant amount of change in terms of the starting 11 if you look back at the side that won the European Championships and started that final against England.
Sid, as Kasey's here, let's talk goalkeepers. You've got the best goalkeeper in the Premier League, arguably the best goalkeeper in La Liga, but neither of them will start.
Well, not necessarily. And this is a growing debate. And I really liked Luis de la Fuente's response to this. And I liked his response to this because, of course, there's an inevitable thing in Spain that the focus is always put on the players from Madrid and Barcelona. And so since Joan Garcia joined Barcelona, all year the debate, and the only real debate that's been in Spain, is about whether Joan Garcia should be in the Spain squad. Now, of course, we all knew that was a debate that seemed a bit weird and a bit forced because it was about third-choice goalkeeper and it wasn't a particularly big deal. But as soon as he was in the squad, that debate would become being the first-choice goalkeeper. You know, once he's in, it won't be about whether he should be in the squad anymore. It'll be about whether he should start. And of course, that's partly focused and partly dominated by the dominance of a club as big as Barcelona. And the same thing happens with Real Madrid. And De La Fuente, when he's asked about this in the press conference to announce the squad, he said, "Well, why doesn't anyone ask me about David Raya? You know, you go on about whether it's Joan Garcia or Unai Simon, but what about David Raya, who, as you rightly say, Dan, has been the best player in possibly the best player in the champions of the Premier League, and possibly deserves an opportunity, but he has not been the focus of the debate."
Who would you have, Case, out of those 3?
Well, I think because of the way the process went, I think you have to stick with Unai Simon.
Really?
But I think if you would have made that decision earlier and actually made the competition open, I thought Joan Garcia's had a phenomenal season. But also, you know, David Raya. But again, are you going to start the guy that has 1 cap? Or are you going to start the guy that was part of the whole process? So I think either you say, to me, you give Unai Simon the tournament because he was your guy going forward.
Right.
Now, I think afterwards you say, okay, let's see where that competition is.
And we've got a lot more time to debate that. Did you want to join in?
I was just going to say, so from the manager's point of view, you can't go wrong whichever one plays, right?
Sure.
The question is, if you change Unai Simon, is that going to affect your back 4? That's the question.
Right.
Not who's good enough to start. You may carry on, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Sid,
Good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well done.
Away from Spain, Sid, there will be an election as to who will be the new president at Real Madrid. Obviously, Florentino Perez up against Riquelme. Just explain in layman's terms what this means.
Okay, in the most simple terms of all, this means that on the 7th of June there will be a vote, and every single member of Real Madrid, every season ticket holder at Real Madrid, every member of the club will have one vote. And it will be a vote, and it will be a straight vote between Florentino Perez and the rest of his candidacy, which of course includes the rest of the board members, and between him and Enrique Riquelme and his board members. One man, one vote, very, very simple. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but the fundamentals are this. Now, what makes this most interesting, I think, really, is that we've not seen elections at Real Madrid for 20 years. And the reason for that is that Florentino has been unopposed for 20 years. It's very difficult to put together a candidacy to stand for the presidency of Real Madrid. It's very difficult to gather the correct amount of support and in particular the money to back your candidacy to be able to do so. And so what makes this so striking is it's been 2 decades since we've seen it happen.
Let's talk about the relationship, shall we, of Vinícius Júnior and Kylian Mbappe. Stevie and Craig and Mac had discussed it at length yesterday. This is the front page of Ours last week. Condemned to understand each other. This is the fact, look, you're stuck with it. It's like brothers, isn't it? You're just stuck with them. You better learn to love them. Jose Mourinho touted as the man who's going to come together and bring these two stars together. Said, I'm not buying this for a second.
Well, I think. Look. I don't think there's necessarily a kind of irredeemable split between them that can't necessarily be fixed in competitive terms. And Kasey and Steve, I'm sure, can give us examples of teammates they've had that didn't necessarily get on. And so I think from Mourinho's point of view, it's not necessarily about making them love each other. It's about making them accept each other and work with each other and work in a way that functions. And there have been various moments over the course of the season where they've made gestures of trying to kind of, if you like, externalise the fact that they can get on, to try and externalise the idea that, no, this relationship is fine, really. And I think there have been 2 different elements to this. One has been, if you like, the sense of them being different people with different ideals. And the other, of course, has been a purely footballing relationship, which is that they kind of get in each other's way. And I think Mourinho needs to deal with both of those things. But I don't think he necessarily needs to make them love each other.
The story so far for both of these players in playing together has actually been divided in when Mbappe's not doing well, Vini is doing well. Yeah. When Vini's not doing well, then Mbappe is doing well. It's never both of them doing well together. In fact, they are elevated when the other one is struggling. When the other one's struggling on the field, when the other one's struggling off the field, when the other one's struggling with whatever. The other one is elevated. And it's elevated also by the fans. Early on, when Vini was having his issues with Xabi Alonso and he wasn't playing well and Mbappe was scoring goals, then it seemed like the fans were all about this being Mbappe's Real Madrid. Then Mbappe stopped scoring goals. Arbeloa comes in. Vini elevates his level of play. He's now scoring goals. Mbappe is having a trip with his girlfriend out in Sardinia. And so now it becomes Vini's team, elevated by the fans, and we don't want Mbappe. Mbappe has to go out the door. There has to be an understanding from the players, the fans, anybody that is involved with Real Madrid, that this team will succeed, or will more likely succeed, if both of them elevate their level of play at the same time. And that is the part that is going to be difficult to be done, because, as Sid just mentioned, they get on each other's way. Mbappe doesn't want to play down the middle, even though he's scoring a bunch of goals, which is something I don't quite understand. And he starts wandering and venturing out into areas that get in the way of Vini. And Vini, when he gets into a more central position, which he should, and they could play off of each other and actually utilize each other, then he feels uncomfortable and he ends up going back to the left wing position. They themselves, if they just understand that if they play off of each other, not against each other, not without each other, but off of each other, they will play at a high level and score goals, and Real Madrid will win matches. That cannot be so difficult to understand.
Sid, why haven't they announced Mourinho yet?
Well, this brings us back to the question you asked 3 or 4 minutes ago, which is about the presidential elections. Because while they could announce Mourinho, while they could see that through, it would be seen as not quite right to announce the new signing of a manager when you may not be the president after the 7th of June. So in other words, there's if you like, a kind of a, what would you call it, a politeness element here, a sense of doing the right thing, of handling it in the right way. And so that gets put on hold for the time being.
Meanwhile, focusing on Barcelona and speculation as who is going to come in and replace Robert Lewandowski. And who's that on the right-hand side? England's great captain, Harry Kane. This is what Ollie Holness had to say about the possibility of Harry Kane moving to Barcelona. Yes, Kane is staying at Bayern, and Barca have no money anyway. There you are, Sid.
I love the fact that Honus is incapable of just saying something and just saying, yeah, no, he's staying, it's fine. He always has to have the little dig, doesn't he? He always has to have the little sort of the little dig in the ribs with the elbow that says, well, you lot have got no cash, so tough luck. It wouldn't be the first time, by the way, that he said that, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time that he turned out to be wrong. For what it's worth, I do see this as a very, very difficult signing for a club like Barcelona to do.
Meanwhile, Sid, Julian Alvarez named Player of the Year for the second year running at Atletico Madrid, but he's not a happy bunny.
No, and to be honest with you, I don't know why he's been named Player of the Year for a second year running. There's no way he's Atletico Madrid's best player this season. But anyway, that's possibly another debate for another day. He, I think, has been clear that he's not entirely convinced about the idea of continuing for almost the whole year. There was that period in the middle of the season in which his performance level was very, very low, and Atletico, I think, dealt with that with quite a lot of tact, actually, and they said that, you know, we understand and we're trying to support him, we're trying to see him through this. And actually, the way they dealt with it, with that kind of tactful approach, was so... how would I put this, kind of empathetic, so gentle that you wondered if there was a really serious problem. If actually at some point someone was going to admit that actually we're dealing with something quite significant now. It doesn't seem to be the case. And now, so Atletico Madrid now in a position where they have to decide what they want to do about this, what kind of fee they would want for him, whether they'll let him go, whether they would take players in part exchange, who they would want him to go to. And of course, I say of course, I suspect that Atletico Madrid would much rather see Paris Saint-Germain turn up with loads and loads of money than see Julian go to another club in Spain.
Yeah, and that club in Spain obviously is Barcelona, Sid.
Yeah, which of course has been the case all year. And you may remember that press conference, I think it was before the Arsenal game, when Diego Simeone was asked about Julian Alvarez off the back of the fact that there'd been some talk in England maybe that Arsenal were interested in him as well. And the English media got very excited because they said he was opening the door. I think what he was really doing was saying, you know, go away, you're not the only ones. And he said, well, you know, lots of people could be interested in Julian. Arsenal could be interested in him. Barcelona could be interested in him. PSG could be interested in him. And now you think, actually, maybe he really was naming the three clubs.
Meanwhile, this week we've got the Champions League final at the weekend, but the very much appetizer to that is the conference final between Crystal Palace and Kasey's former side, Rayo Vallecano. Who would have thought, Kasey, when you were playing for Rayo, that they'd end up in a European final?
We got to a quarterfinal.
European final.
Yes. No. Well, if you keep adding more and more finals, eventually you're going to get there.
Don't dilute the success of.
Well, you dilute the competition. How is that up? No, it's excellent for Rayo, and it's excellent for Crystal Palace. You know, two sides that you wouldn't, come straight to your mind that they're going to be in a European competition final. So to give the fans that opportunity, I think it's cool.
Sid, this, of course, a huge story, a huge surprise, given the mess that Rayo is off the pitch and on it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's the key here. And I was talking to Jorge the Frutos the other day about this, and he said, well, you know, in part, it's exactly as Kasey's saying, you know, in part the Conference League is there for this, for teams like us to have an opportunity to have a European adventure, to have a European success, to maybe reach a final. And of course, if you are a Spanish team in a European competition, you would anticipate that you have an opportunity to go a reasonable distance. That said, there really aren't clubs like Rayo Vallecano out there because, as you say, it's a real basket case of a club, and they do so much wrong, and they seem so gloriously, brilliantly and enjoyably out of place in European competition, in a stadium that's only got three sides, in a stadium that's falling down, where there's an enormous divide between the fans and the president, where the players themselves this year have not been able to train at the training ground because it's not in sufficiently good condition, in which they had to play a home game against Atletico Madrid away because their own ground was not in good enough condition, in which the players' union put out a statement saying that the Rayo Vallecano squad had had enough of this and they were demanding the most basic of facilities needed to play professional football, in which the president of the club called the fans, what was the phrase now? Drunkards, layabouts, and brain dead. Wow. So you know, things are not good at Rayo Vallecano, and yet the team, exactly, it really is. I mean, we could change the name of Extra Time to Drunkards, Layabouts, and the Idol.
Just have that the caption when Stevie and Craig are on.
I mean, it really is extraordinary. But obviously, in that adversity, I think comes some of the strength of the squad. I think it's a very, very close group, the squad, with the manager who's got, I think, a very high degree of sensitivity and sensibility towards the way that the players feel. There's an incredible connection between the fans and the players, if not between the fans and the manager, or the fans and the president, or the players and the president. And so while they do a lot of things wrong, somewhere in there, something very, very special has been built.
Even back when I was there, you had no idea where you were training from day to day. We would be at one place, and then maybe we'd be in the athletic stadium. And then maybe we'd be at Vallecano in the stadium. And then I had one, my Spanish wasn't very good early on, and I didn't read something, and I showed up at the wrong place. And I had to call, and I wasn't late for training, but I was late for the time you were supposed to be there. Right. And you know, every morning I would call the goalkeeping coach just to confirm where are we training today. And we used to think about, you know, the successes we had on the field, the successes the club is having now on the field, and you just thought, if you just got the infrastructure right, it could be such a great little club. You know, you could just...
And still, what, 40 years later?
It's worse.
Yep.
And you just think, how is that possible? And you're still finishing mid-table in La Liga.
Sid, are you going to the game?
Fortunately, I'm not, no. I was really looking forward to this one, but it hasn't been possible to go. And it will be a great occasion, I think, as well. And you know, Kasey knows, having been there, the connection with the neighbourhood, because bear in mind, this is in a neighbourhood of Madrid that was separate from the city, but has been swallowed up by the city, that's very proud of its kind of working class heritage, that sees itself as separate from the rest of the country, that has a very, very defined identity. And it's a place where it's a lot of fun to go and watch football. It feels like a club from 40 years ago, that kind of, if you like, the last one standing of a different era.
But Sid, do you think that's going to be a bunch of the Vallecas community traveling to East Germany for a match? So it's
11,000 are going, which is extraordinary, isn't it?
Awesome.
I mean, you know, and it's a really, really big deal for them. 11,000 going. There was actually a story this week which I think defines it quite nicely, actually, and defines the way that you look at Rayo Vallecano, that kind of sense that everything's wrong, but at the same time everything's kind of all right. That there were a number of fans that got caught out in a scam, which was basically, obviously, someone offering to charter a flight, and for a relatively low fee, they would charter a flight and take Rayo fans there. And of course, lots of them signed up, and the person who took the money just disappeared. And so the response to this, apart from the initial tragedy of, my God, you know, the greatest moment in your entire history, you're not going to get there, a crowdfunding account was put together, and the players started pouring money into it to ensure that their fans didn't miss out on this. And I think that says something in the end. In the end, that's kind of, if you like, as I say, the kind of the portrait of this club, that everything is wrong, but somewhere in all that mess, there is a way of bringing them together and making things okay again.
Great stuff as always, Sid. Just a reminder, we'll be reflecting on that game on the next edition of ESPN FC, plus continuing to count down to the start of the World Cup.